I've always been a massive fan of Daredevil, and throughout this video, you might hear me call him Daredevil by accident, Daredevil, but I can't help it. I always fucking end up doing it when I get in the zone. Daredevil, not Daredevil. But anyways, I've always loved Daredevil. You see, I think I did it again. I've always loved Daredevil tremendously. And to be honest, the thing that really got me into Daredevil the first time was Ben Affleck's movie from 2003. And I know, like, it's a movie that gets clowned on, made fun of, hated on, but I was a kid, I was young, and seeing Daredevil, seeing Ben Affleck portray him, seeing how badass he was, how savage he was, how he beat the shit out of these criminals, and how this badass music was playing all the time, and Jennifer Garner playing Elektra. I mean, it was a fun movie and a good movie to me. I have always loved that movie. I have always been a fan of that movie, and I will always credit that movie for getting me into the world of Daredevil. That's what got me into the character, and that's why I love that character so much. I also really enjoyed seeing his appearance in Marvel Nemesis Rise of the Imperfects. You didn't have much exposure around Daredevil when I was growing up. I mean, we had him appear here and there in some other animated series that weren't really his own, in some video games, and of course you had the Daredevil movie. But other than that, there wasn't like so much exposure to the character like something similar to Batman or something similar to Spider-Man. But I really enjoyed Daredevil even though he didn't have that same exposure. I really appreciated his appearances in the 90s Spider-Man animated series. Every time he came out or he appeared, I thought, that's a cool-ass character. That's a cool-ass guy. I love that Daredevil is out there doing his fucking thing as well during the events of Spider-Man. I really love when they did those little crossovers, and seeing Daredevil was one of my favorite aspects of that show. So really, I have always been interested in more Daredevil stuff, more Daredevil games and things like that here on the channel, but we've never really had much information out there, and I've never really had any new games or anything to cover here. I've always wanted like Insomniac to pick up the Daredevil slack and say, all right, you know what, let's make a whole Daredevil game and let's really craft this fucking awesome story, kind of like Spider-Man 2018. I would love that. But here on the channel, we did talk a little bit about Marvel's canceled games, where we kind of went in depth talking about 3 games that were canceled by Marvel and games that just never got to see the light of day. In one of those videos, we talked about the cancellation for this Daredevil game that we're talking about today. But I only talked about it for like a minute, and I went very quickly through what happened and the history of it so we could move on to the next one. But I felt that this game really needed its own video where we dove a little deeper into the lore, into the history, into the story, into what actually happened, and why this Daredevil game for the PS2 never came to be. And I've always wanted to revisit this video. I've always wanted to talk about this a little bit more, and so I felt that today would be the perfect time to do so. Now, what really put this idea in my head to come back to this topic? Well, I shared a few days ago on my YouTube post a new comic that I picked up from Daredevil, and it was so beautiful and it was so cool, and I said, I need a Daredevil game now. And just thinking more about it, I was like, you know what, that canceled game is out there. You can download it now somehow. You could probably play it a little bit, or you could watch the full gameplay online somewhere and really get a feel for that, feel what could have been, basically. And so really me getting into my comics again, I've been buying a lot of comics, Punisher, Spider-Man, Batman, Daredevil specifically, and I've got a few Daredevil ones now, and just seeing those comics really revived something inside of me that I was like, you know what, I really want to cover this on the channel. So that's how we ended up back talking about the canceled PS2 game that never got to see the light of day. Now, I really wanted to know the story of the game better. I really wanted to know what this game was really going to be about. I really wanted to understand it because I just felt like a craving for it, and that's why I decided to do a little deep dive. I also have been collecting a lot of movies, and I found the Daredevil Collector's Edition, and I bought that. I 100% bought that for the original 2003 movie. Now, I've never seen the director's cut, but I hear that the director's cut fixed a lot of things for the original theatrical release that a lot of people didn't enjoy and didn't like. But I bought the movie. I have the original, and I have the now director's cut, and I'm going to watch it very soon. I've been just itching to watch it, but I haven't found the perfect time yet. Like, I want it to be a good-ass day, nighttime. I want to get down here and put it on the big-ass TV and just enjoy enjoy that. So I'm really excited for finding that copy. I think I paid like $7 for it. I don't know, at a local like secondhand gaming store, but it's in really good condition. So I'm very excited to check that out. I'm just like enthralled in the world of Daredevil right now. So again, all of this really got me curious. And so I also think that the more we talk about Daredevil and the more that we continue to support the stuff that they're doing with Daredevil and other mediums, there might be a big return for him in video games. I mean, I can almost smell a Daredevil game coming from some big publisher. It has to happen. Daredevil is coming back with a vengeance here. He's part of the MCU now officially, and I think that we could expect something like a Daredevil game coming very soon. But since we don't have that, we're gonna have to take a look at Daredevil: The Man Without Fear, a PS2 game that never really released. Now, the information that we have about this game comes from The Hidden Place and the Lost Media Wiki. According to their sources, the game was set to release on consoles sometime in 2003. The game was being developed by 5,000 Feet Studios, which was a indie game developer located in Reno, Nevada. Now, the game was to be published by Encore Incorporated. The game would have been released on the PlayStation 2, Xbox consoles, and the PC. Now, if we go back in time a little bit, we can better understand why 5,000 Feet Studios wanted to work on the game, or how they got to work on the game. Before their work on The Hero from Hell's Kitchen began, the studio had only worked as support for other video games, and now they wanted to work on their own independent game. They had a working relationship with Encore Incorporated because they had helped them with a previous military game. Now, Encore had bought the rights to use Captain America and Daredevil in the gaming world, so Encore offered 5,000 Feet Studios the chance to work on Daredevil. Thus, they began their work on the game. Now, originally slated for only the PS2, the game was going to be much smaller and was considered a low-budget PS2 game that would really be a series of vignettes celebrating some of Daredevil's best moments. However, this all would change when 5,000 Feet Studios president was contacted by a friend at Sony, who revealed to him that they were working on releasing a new film with Ben Affleck playing the Man Without Fear. This would cause the budget for 5,000 Feet Studios to become much bigger, and it would turn the game into an open-world, full-scale release that would release alongside or close to the film's release. This would also make the game available for Xbox and Windows PC. Now, according to Lost Media, tensions would begin to rise slowly due to Marvel and Sony's involvement with the game. 5,000 Feet Studios would meet with executives at Sony and Microsoft who had certain demands for the game, particularly Sony, as they expressed their desire to the developer that they wanted Daredevil to have a beat-em-up style combat system, and they wanted a grinding mechanic that would be inspired by one of their hottest franchises at the time, the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series. Microsoft, on the other hand, was a little bit more hands-off and allowed 5,000 Feet Studios to work on the game as they saw fit. However, Sony and Marvel would clash due to Marvel wanting Daredevil to be faithful to their intellectual property, while Sony wanted them to have more creative freedom to change things about the character that translated better into gameplay mechanics. Now, apparently the game's development would go smoothly for the first few months, and the previous tensions between Sony and Marvel weren't affecting the work going on at 5,000 Feet Studios at the time. However, the stumbling block would come when new staff was hired to integrate the engine that was going to be used for the game. It was an engine that was used heavily at the time for open world games. However, Encore apparently didn't want to pay the fees associated with the use of the engine. This would lead to the engineers on the team to attempt to create their own engine to power the game. However, the engine that they created wouldn't work well with some gameplay mechanics that were integral to the game itself, one of those being the use of the Shadow World, which allowed Daredevil to locate enemies and detect their fear level. Another gameplay mechanic that wouldn't bode well with the game's engine was the use of his billy clubs, which were the main source of combat in the game. Now, due to all of this, the game would miss its original release date of February 2003, which would have coincided with Ben Affleck's Daredevil movie. This caused the game to be delayed to the summer of 2003. However, the studio was facing many issues at the time, even alleged drug abuse from some of its staff, and this slowed down the process of the game, and it would be forced to switch from a fully open world experience to a more linear third-person beat-em-up style game. Now, the game would continue under development, with many reports suggesting that it was worked on up until March of 2004. Apparently, the game was almost finished when many staff from 5,000 Feet Studios decided to leave, which left the studio in a tough situation. And to make matters worse, Marvel and Sony's disagreements had basically reached a boiling point, and it was the final nail in the coffin, so to speak. when Marvel decided to not approve the game due to them feeling that 5,000 Feet Studios sided more with Sony's demands on their character. This apparently caused Daredevil to steer too far from what Marvel had envisioned for its character. This led ultimately to the cancellation of Daredevil the Man Without Fear, which is absolute bullshit in my opinion. I mean, executives fighting over that type of shit, really kind of causing a game to not come out, which, some would say, well, it's their property and they should do what they see fit, but you got to make some sacrifice, I think, sometimes for gameplay mechanics. So I really don't know. That's just my opinion. So my fault for inserting my opinion there. Honestly, this is bittersweet for me. I would go out and assume that it's also bittersweet for many of you. It feels like the world was robbed of a very cool and unique classic game. If you take a look at what kind of games we were getting at the time, and you look at what's available for Daredevil, the Man Without Fear, it feels like a very early 2000s game. And although today it might seem like, well, it's not that good of a game, the gameplay seems a little repetitive, everything seems a little boring, seems a little dull. At the time when it would have released, I really don't think it would have been that bad. I think it would have been a very cool game, and I think a lot of people would be reminiscing about it today. A lot of people would be going back and doing retrospects on it because it would just be like a cool game that came out at the time for a character that's very beloved that doesn't have enough media exposure in the gaming world. I mean, if you look at Daredevil, what kind of Daredevil games do we have? We don't really have that many at all. And so having something dedicated directly to Daredevil, the Man Without Fear, with its own original story, its own combat system, it would have been something really cool to look back on, and I bet so many people would love to have in their collection. And so that's basically the story of Daredevil, the Man Without Fear, and its cancellation and why it was canceled and some of the things that they were working on at the time. So I hope that you have a better understanding of the game. I know I do, and it kind of scratched that itch that I wanted. Now, something else that's really on my mind regarding this game is the plot, the story itself. This is something that we didn't cover, or we haven't covered yet throughout this video. And the reason that I didn't do that is because I wanted to explain the story and everything that we have here. What's very cool and very interesting is that there was a build of the game that was leaked by a ex-developer of 5,000 Square Feet Studios, who basically released the game and released gameplay footage, released voice acting, released cutscenes, and you were able to kind of put it together. Now, the game is obviously missing some chapters, it's missing some things because it's incomplete. It was never fully finished. The final details were never touched up and done. But with what we do have available online, we can look at the story and get an idea of what the game could have been. And we get a very, very good idea of the game. We get a good look at almost all 10 chapters available. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look into the story of Daredevil, the Man Without Fear for the PS2. Now, the footage that we're going to be using is provided by Wishing to Kyle, which is a big YouTube channel with over 800,000 subscribers. I reached out to her asking her if we could use her footage for this special video, and she kindly agreed. So we're gonna use her footage here, and we're gonna look at this as a story so far. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Chapter 1 is titled On Patrol. Daredevil fights crime in Hell's Kitchen. Foggy goes missing. Daredevil believes that he was abducted, and Daredevil also thinks that it was Kingpin because he knew who Daredevil really was. Daredevil would track Kingpin to his favorite restaurant in Hell's Kitchen, and as he arrived, he smelled Elektra nearby. Daredevil assumed she knew about Foggy, and Daredevil needed to convince her to help. Daredevil would watch from afar while Elektra would fight Kingpin's men, and then the restaurant would suddenly blow up after Kingpin went inside.
I tracked Kingpin to his favorite restaurant, a hole-in-the-wall joint in Hell's Kitchen. No sign of Foggy, but that would have been too easy. As I watched him enter the building, I recognized someone's perfume. Of course, she had to show up. Elektra. She had to have some information about Foggy, and that meant convincing her to help me, which is never easy. I didn't have time to ponder this before she got into it with the Kingpin's men. On my way down to the street, I think I heard the bomb's trigger mechanism click into place as the restaurant the Kingpin was in was reduced to dust. The Kingpin of crime is dead.
After this, Chapter 2 would begin, the chase. The Kingpin now murdered, and Daredevil with nowhere to go must find Elektra, as he knows that she is involved somehow, and she must know what or how Kingpin was involved with Foggy's disappearance.
When I caught up with Elektra, she was her usual charming self. I'd like to think she wasn't trying to kill me, but you never know. If this was the way she wanted to play it, then I was more than ready.
Chapter 3 would be titled Dinner with Elektra. Daredevil would chase Elektra through the rooftops in Hell's Kitchen. Eventually, Daredevil is ambushed by Kingpin's henchmen, who also wanted Elektra dead. Once they were at the top of the high-rise, Daredevil attempted to subdue Elektra, all while fighting Kingpin's men.
I asked her what she had gotten herself into. She said she was told to be at that restaurant by an anonymous third party as part of a new contract, but she had nothing to do with the explosion. I told her that Foggy was missing. She said she'd keep an eye out, and that I'd better go stop the gang war that was about to erupt. Without the Kingpin around to keep the peace, there was bound to be trouble.
Chapter 4 would begin, titled Gang War. The murder of the Kingpin has disrupted Hell's Kitchen, and the crime families now would fight and vie for control, which means that things would get very bloody and a lot of innocent lives could be taken. Daredevil would begin to clean up the city by going after Hammerhead's men, and then he would go after Silverman's gang. During the gang war, the Hammerhead guys attempted to detonate a bomb that would kill several Hell's Kitchen civilians. However, Daredevil would be able to stop it. And after doing so, he would move on to Silverman's gang, and eventually Daredevil would take them out. After Silverman's gang was defeated, Daredevil would be freed to continue his search for Foggy.
With 2 of the 3 major crime families neutralized, I was able to continue my search for Foggy. Silvermane's lieutenant confessed that he knew the Kingpin had dealings with an underground organization just before he died. Just how far underground was something I would discover for myself.
And then Chapter 5 would begin, the sewers. Daredevil would enter the sewers, and he must navigate them as he attempted to finally find Foggy. While in the sewers, Daredevil would find Foggy's wallet, half-eaten chocolate bar, and other things which would confirm to Daredevil his suspicions that Foggy had been there. Eventually, Daredevil would run into the Hand while down at the sewers. And this led into Chapter 6, the Sewer King. Daredevil's search for Foggy would lead him to fight with the Sewer King, a disgusting creature that lived and ruled the sewers. After defeating the Sewer King, Daredevil would receive information that led him to Foggy's current whereabouts.
Bullseye's calling card. And it had Foggy's scent on it. My friend was in more trouble than I thought. My mortal enemy Bullseye was involved.
And this would lead to Chapter 7, The Rose. After the defeat of Hammerhead's gang, Silverman's gang, the Sewer Gang, Daredevil needed to defeat the Rose Gang to ensure peace in the city of Hell's Kitchen. Daredevil would even the odds and take out the Rose Gang. However, this would lead him directly to Bullseye, which led to Chapter 8, Bullseye. Daredevil must now confront Bullseye, his arch nemesis.
Bullseye dared me to follow him. Said he had a surprise for me. I was not in the mood. I knew any surprise he had for me would be unpleasant. If he could lead me to my friend, I was willing to play his game. For now.
Bullseye would lead Daredevil to an underground facility where Elektra was being held and trapped in a cage with Bullseye as they would both fight for their life. And Daredevil must fight through dozens of men to eventually free Elektra. After freeing Elektra, Daredevil and her would work together to defeat Bullseye. And in Chapter 9, Foggy would finally be within Daredevil's grasp, but he was still in danger, so he needed to act fast. And after finding Foggy and defeating Bullseye, Daredevil's hunt would lead him to what he believed was a big conspiracy. Chapter 10 would be titled Redemption. Daredevil felt that something was off. Something didn't feel right about Kingpin's supposed assassination. This would lead Daredevil to go into Kingpin's building, and he would head for Kingpin's office. But as he approached the office, Daredevil's heightened senses would go off like crazy, and Daredevil would find Kingpin alive. He was never murdered. He planned the whole thing. Daredevil would fight Kingpin and defeat him. Daredevil would also rescue Foggy, and the city of Hell's Kitchen could finally rest, at least for now. All right, guys, so that was the story of Daredevil's canceled game titled The Man Without Fear for the PS2, Xbox, and PC. That would have been the entire story. It would have been an original story that took a lot of inspiration from Elektra Lives Again and other Daredevil media. Now, I will say this. I usually type everything out when I am making a story video, and for this video in particular, because it was very different and I wasn't playing and I was looking at the footage provided by Wish Takali, I was writing it all down. And my writing, my fucking handwriting is awful. Like, I was reading that and I was like, what the fuck does that say? Who wrote that? And it was literally me. I fucking hate writing. So anyways, that was the story. That was everything that we know available to us about Daredevil, the Man Without Fear. I really, really wanted to go back and visit this game, visit this story. And I really hope you guys enjoyed it. I really hope you guys learned something and, you know, got a better idea of what this story could be. Again, a special thanks to Wish Takali for providing the video. And a special thanks to you guys for being here watching this and giving me the opportunity to work on something that I personally felt very passionate about and something that I really wanted to work on for my personal self. And I hope that you guys can also enjoy it. Let me know what you thought about Daredevil, the Man Without Fear, and would you have wanted this game to actually release back in 2003?